Hello, this is Dr. Stephen Cohen, and this video shows a 9-0-proline suture technique for transscleral fixation of an in-the-bag dislocated posterior chamber intraocular lens. This surgery is being done as part of a 23-gauge vitrectomy, and here you see the vitrectomy ports being placed into the eye. The infusion helps maintain a steady intraocular pressure throughout the surgery, and the other vitrectomy ports are useful for gaining access to the lens as needed. A limited conjunctival peritomy is made in order to gain access to the sclera for placement of the transscleral sutures. In order to ensure that the path of the initial suture path is entirely in front of the intraocular lens, viscoelastic is used to push the intraocular lens back. 23-gauge trocar needles are used to make sclerotomies, and those sclerotomies are used to pass the sutures in and out of the eye, and later they'll be used to rotate the knot into the eye. The first half of the double-arm 9-0-proline suture is placed through the cornea carefully so that no cornea or Descemet's membrane is engaged. The 27-gauge needle that will be used to guide the proline suture out of the eye is placed through one of the 23-gauge sclerotomies. Next, the needle with the proline suture is docked into the 27-gauge needle and gently removed from the eye. Once the proline needle has been removed from the eye, a sclerotomy to sclerotomy pass is made, taking care to engage enough sclera to support the lens. This needle is left in place so that when the next needle is passed, there's no worry about clipping the proline suture and accidentally cutting it. The second half of the double-arm proline suture will now be placed through the intraocular lens capsular complex. Here you see the needle has been pre-placed through the cornea, and a 27-gauge needle is going through that sclerotomy and is gently being nudged up behind the intraocular lens. It's a very small pupil. I had to use a muscle hook in order to pull the lens into a position where I could make sure that the needle was passing in the right location. I try to engage as much capsule and as much haptic as possible so that the lens will have as much support as possible through the 9-0-proline suture. You'll notice next that once this proline suture has been removed from the eye, the second needle is removed, and this way there's no worry about cutting either of the proline sutures, and you'll see that because of the sclerotomy to sclerotomy pass, the suture is entirely buried within the sclera except for the small part that will later be tied. Next, an identical set of steps is taken to secure the other half of the intraocular lens. Here you see viscoelastic being placed into the eye to push the lens back a little bit, the pre-placement of the proline suture, and the 27-gauge needle placed through the sclerotomy. The needle's docked into the 27-gauge needle and then gently removed. This pass is particularly clean because the needle did dock. I didn't need to push with the needle holder like I did on the other side. Here I'm slightly enlarging the sclerotomy. It's very important that these passes are made through the sclerotomy, and here's the sclerotomy to sclerotomy needle pass, and again the needle's left in place to protect the proline suture. It's important and a little bit difficult to make sure all these passes are made clean through the corneal incisions and through the scleral incisions, otherwise the suture will hang up on the cornea, or later on when the knot's rotated, the knot won't rotate in the eye, it'll hang up on the sclera. You'll notice that once this loop of proline suture engages the lens, I pull the lens up. Neither of these sutures is permanently tied. I tie each of them with just a light loop and try to get the lens as centered as possible. I do a single throw through each of the prolines, and then I use a lens hook to sort of guide the lens into the center of the eye. You don't want to pull too hard on these sutures because they tend to cheese wire through the capsule. This intraocular lens was a haptic intraocular lens, and there were no holes to suture through, and therefore there is some danger of losing the capsule and losing the support of the intraocular lens if the sutures are pulled under too much tension. This video has been extensively edited, and the entire surgery takes a little over an hour. Here you see the proline sutures being tied and trimmed, and then they're rotated into the eye by putting gentle pressure on them with a 27-gauge blunt cannula. I use the cannula that comes with the viscoelastic. As long as the sutures were properly placed through the sclerotomy, the suture's knot has no trouble rotating into the eye. These 27 gauge sclerotomies are self-sealing. I do a check at the end for vitreous in the anterior chamber using Kenalog. This patient didn't have any. There was a lot of viscoelastic there though, so I do put the vitrector into the eye at the end to rinse out the viscoelastic. I hope you found this video helpful. This slight modification of a previously described technique is a nice way of keeping the Prolene suture entirely buried in the sclera and burying the knot into the eye without making a scleral tunnel and without too much manipulation of the sclera.